With the first pick overall, the New Jersey Devils are proud to select from the U.S. program, Jack Hughes.
Let's go, baby!
Lays it across, Vatanen drives, score! Sammy Vatanen let it rip. It's a power play goal, and the Devils have opened it up. Oh, my. Nico walking in, shooting, score! Nico Hischier on the rush, ends it in overtime, and the Devils win it.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Heads Up Hockey. We have New York Post Mollie Walker, UMass Amherst grad, and of course, she looks after the Islanders and the Rangers. So, welcome aboard, Mollie.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, Jim hasn't jumped on just yet, but I actually was on the Zoom call listening to the Lindy Ruff Fitzgerald conference call.
Mm-hmm.
I saw you at the end. That was a good follow-up that you had. So
Thank you. Got to keep it Rangers centric for the New York Post.
Well, before Jim gets on, can you tell me what you learned about Lindy Ruff in the first couple seasons with the Rangers?
I think he has a very good command of his experience. You know, he's really been around the block with the Sabres and with the Stars, and he's been around generational talent as well. So what I found very interesting in the conference call he had today is he talked a lot about how he spent his time with the Rangers trying to do the things that he wasn't able to do as a head coach, such as getting to know his players and spending more time on the ice with them, whereas head coaches sometimes have other things they need to tend to. So I found that very interesting that he wanted to take the time to step away from being a head coach and getting to know players better. So I think that'll definitely help him in the long run with being the head coach of the Devils for sure.
And Jim Biringer is officially on the line. And welcome on in, Jim, the co-host of the show.
Hey, Mollie, how are you? Thanks for...
Of course. Thank you for having me.
I reached out after I heard you on Sports Talk Canada with Ryan Payton. That was a great interview. You guys talk about hockey and everything. And obviously with the big news of the day, Devils officially announcing Lindy Ruff as the head coach and keeping Tom Fitzgerald on as their general manager. What do you think about Fitzgerald staying as the new GM?
I don't cover the Devils as much as I do the Rangers and Islanders, but obviously after serving in the interim position, you know, there was a reason that they must have kept him on. And I think he probably really got along with Lindy Ruff too. I saw kind of some chemistry with them on screen during the conference call today, and that they were very much so on the same page. So you always want that with a coach and a general manager. So if I were to guess, I think that played a big part in it. And I think they're going to be a good duo over there in Jersey.
And so I'm reading your article today, and it says what Lindy basically said: I am excited to get back in the lead chair and guide the future of this team. This is a fantastic opportunity to lead a group of young talent and strong leadership to the next level. So can you re-paraphrase exactly what you wrote there and re-paraphrase it for our listeners?
I think Lindy has a really good understanding of the team that he's coming into right now. I mean, if you look at it, someone like Jack Hughes in his rookie season, he watched his coach fired, his GM fired, his captain Andy Green traded to the Islanders, one of the team's best players traded in Taylor Hall to the Coyotes. So I think that there was a lot of disruption going on in the Devils system over the last year, and having Lindy come in and Fitzgerald staying, I feel like it'll be really good for the team to have sort of a calmer environment, and for those younger players like Nico to just start working on themselves and working on the team now going forward without all the uncertainty in the air. So I think Lindy's very excited about that opportunity.
And staying with Lindy Ruff, he was the assistant coach of the Rangers, a team that you cover for the Post. How is his loss going to affect that team going into the play-in round, which starts August 1st?
I'm not sure if it'll impact them in any way. I think not having a coach that you were with the whole season will be a little disruptive, but I know that our very own Larry Brooks reported today that the Hartford Wolfpack assistant coach Gord Murphy will be accompanying the team in Toronto for the NHL's return to play tournament. So he will temporarily fill the assistant position with Ruff being gone. So I don't think it'll be that big of a distraction since they're filling the role and with a familiar face as well. So I don't think it'll impact them too much, but definitely something they're going to have to move on from and find a new coach.
Yeah, I know, because I mentioned that to you yesterday, DM me on Twitter. This is something we see in college football a lot, with like assistants getting picked up and poached right before like these big games. So it was just interesting to see just to have this come down right before the playoffs. That was the first thing that just came into my head, but that's because I'm a big sports guy. Staying with the play-in round for a minute, with the break, with this COVID break, the other teams that you cover, which team will benefit the most from having this long layoff? Will it be the Rangers or the Islanders?
I think the Islanders most certainly, because they're coming into this play-in round with a more equipped team than they had at the end before the season was paused. They were missing Adam Pelech. Johnny Boychuk just took a skate to the face, wasn't playing. And now, especially with Adam Pelech, I think that was a huge person that they were missing this entire season. It kind of ripped the rug out from underneath them, the idea that they were losing him for the season, and their defense just wasn't the same. So bringing someone like Adam Pelech back on is going to be monumental for the team. And the Islanders in general were just on a downward spiral heading into the break. So the fact that they were able to step away and regroup and get a lot of players that are going to be healthy this time around, I think it's going to be very rejuvenating for them and give a lot of motivation to the team. So I think they definitely will benefit the most. The Rangers, I think they'll be fine. I don't think it disrupted them in any way. They were, starting to really find their footing and such. So the only thing that I can think of is something that's going to affect every player in the NHL is these players haven't been off the ice for more than 3 months in their entire lives, I would imagine. Even in the off season, these players still had access to rinks and such. So just the fact that they have not been skating competitively for 3 months is probably the longest that any of these players have ever gone in their entire careers. So I think that will be one of the biggest things that every player in the NHL will have to get over.
And so it sounds like with this, this pause, getting ready to almost become a restart button on the 13th, when I believe they get back to playing, if they approve the CBA, et cetera, and they get back to the playing round. With guys like Anders Lee, Brock Nelson, Eberle, Ladd, Clutterbuck, Pajot, do you think that it helps those veterans in the New York Islanders forward group to help, regather and play to that Barry Trotz style of hockey that he started adding after he had left the Capitals?
100%. One thing I've said is that toward the end there, when the Islanders were kind of on a downward spiral, their biggest competition was themselves. They were playing against themselves. It was their mistakes. It was just their own play and their own decisions that were kind of getting in their way, and they were kind of getting in their heads a little bit. And I talked to Anders about that a little bit. He felt that the team was just too wrapped up in their head. So I think stepping away and having the opportunity to come back with a rejuvenated team is 100% going to play into these veterans' favors. And I know that Anders and all the players that you mentioned are leaders, and the way JG Peugeot came in and he just fit in like a puzzle. So I think that it's really going to play in their favor 100%.
And do you think Semyon Varlamov and Tomas Greiss, being the goaltenders for the Islanders, do you think they can stave off the play-in round given their experience that Varlamov had been in DC and in Colorado, and Greiss being the stable genius he is in the Islanders?
Definitely, 100%. I think both goalies are very experienced, and they're veteran netminders. So I think they're going to be ready for anything that's thrown at them. It's a very interesting situation that's going on with the Islanders goaltending situation. Obviously, all fans are waiting for Sorokin to come up, and it's looking like with this new CBA agreement that won't be possible for this upcoming play-in series. So a lot of people are very disappointed about that, but I think it'll be very interesting to see how Barry Trotz chooses to deploy his goalies, because he never ever reveals any rhyme or reason as to why he chooses either of them. No matter how many times we try to pull it out of him, he really is he goes with his gut, I guess, and he never tells anybody until we see them skating out first onto the ice. So it'll be very interesting to see who he goes with, because honestly, I think he could go either way.
It's very Lamoriello-esque, which we as Devils fans understand that Lou and guys like that he hires are pretty tight to the vest as they can get. But I want to switch over to the Rangers part. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of young, high-octane, promising forwards in Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad. You have Kreider, who was supposed to have been traded, but he got the extension. You have Capo Caco, who might not play because I heard he has a pre-existing condition of diabetes. Is that true?
Yes, he's a type 1 diabetic, and he has celiac disease as well.
So what does this mean for the Rangers going forward if he's not able to play? And who do you think would step in his place given the right wing position?
I think that it really would just be a shift up. Honestly, you could have anybody from Jesper Foss to anyone of they're very center heavy. Any of the centers could be shifted to the wing as well. I don't know if it'll have that big of an effect if Kakko can't play, because obviously it was only his first season with the team, and he did very well in his first season, but not to the extent that people would like to see a number 2 draft pick do. But obviously, you got to give the kid a second to breathe. But I don't think it'll be that big of an effect if Kakko can't play. But again, we shall see. I know John Davidson said that he promises to listen to science, and if in any way Kakko is at an increased risk by playing, then they're not even going to hesitate and they won't play him.
Going back to the Islanders goaltending for a second, as you said, we really don't know who's going to start. It seems like no matter where Lamoriello is, he doesn't tip his hat. Neither does Barry Trotz. But what's your gut tell you? Who starts game 1 in the play-in round against Florida?
Given how the end of the season started to go, I would probably go with Varlamov. For whatever reason, I feel like a majority of the final starts started going to Varlamov, and Greiss kind of had a couple of tough games where he was replaced by Varley too. So if I were to guess, I think I would go with Varlamov.
Yeah, I think that's the smart play too. And then like a short series, now that we know it's best of 5 in these qualifying rounds, you got to imagine the Islanders are a little bit of a favorite going into the series just because of that defensive style that they play. And you only need to win 3 games. So that's got to be a factor going in, especially for a team like Florida who likes to run and gun all the time.
100%. I think the Islanders, Barry Trotz does a very, very well job of informing his players and doing the scouting report and focusing on the things that the teams are going to throw at them. So I think with the Islanders playing style, when they're at the top of their game and they're playing that relentless two-way hockey, that, they could beat anybody. But again, like I said before, they cannot keep going down that downward spiral that they were when the season went into a pause. Their biggest competition is going to be themselves and playing to the standard that they did at the beginning of the season with that 17 game point streak, which was absolutely insane. So they've showed that they're able to do it. It's just a matter of getting back to that style of play. And I think having players that were hurt or they expected never to even see for the rest of the 2019-20 season is going to be really uplifting for them.
And I want to go back to talk about how the Rangers are going to face the Carolina Hurricanes. And the Hurricanes are, on average, they're about a 26-year-old team on average, with the help of Justin Williams being the big key veteran. What do you think of a big veteran like him, who's really good in, postseason playing round type style, who could be a disruptor of a key player, along with Jacob Slavin and Brady Shea, former Ranger, who could, be playing with a chip on his shoulder after the Rangers traded him away?
100%. I think that it's going to be a really great matchup between the Hurricanes, and especially because of all the reports coming out that Carolina was one of the teams that really didn't want to go along with what the shaked out tournament was. So I think that will definitely, you're lying to yourself if you don't think the Rangers players heard that and are thinking about that coming into this game. So I get, Justin Williams and Slavin, they're Ranger killers. They're always on the ice, I feel like, when they play the Rangers, and they're definitely going to be a big obstacle for the Rangers to overcome. But I think that everything for the Rangers really started to come together as they were heading into the pause. So if they're able to just pick that right back up again, which again is going to be extremely difficult, but if they can and even build upon it, then they're going to be in really good shape.
And do you think Tony DeAngelo and Ryan Lindgren and a couple of the other young defensemen on that Ranger right-handed core might get a little too excited, where it might, make them out of place, where they get mismatches versus Carolina and them having Andrei Svechnikov coming down the ice?
I really wouldn't think so. When I think about the Rangers' defensive pairings, I really think that Fox and Lindgren are one of the most unexpectedly effective defensive pairings in the league. I think that they were tremendous this season against any of the top dogs that were thrown against them. Lindgren is just a natural competitor. He's tough. He's edgy. Got into it with Brad Marchand earlier in the year. He's not afraid of anything. And same with Fox. He's so poised and beyond his years on the ice already. I was listening to Tony DeAngelo's podcast, and he was so uncomfortable because they kept gassing him up, and he's like, I didn't know you guys thought I was this good, but he definitely impressed a lot of people this year. And I watched him at Harvard when he played against UMass. And then he was going up against Cale Makar, obviously. So it was a little bit lopsided, and we had a good laugh about that, and Fox and I. So I think that the Rangers defensive pairings they're not that way. I really don't think it'll be an issue. And like I said, I think Fox and Lindgren are just going to grow into themselves more. And if they keep them on the same defensive pairing, there's no telling where that can go.
And speaking of something that's up in the air right now, it's the Rangers goaltending. The Rangers were 3-0 against the Hurricanes, but Henrik Lundqvist started. I believe he started every one of those games.
Yes, he did.
So it's going to be interesting to see what they do going into the playing round. If again, what does your gut tell you on who's starting against the Hurricanes?
If I was a betting woman, I would say that Igor Shesterkin will be in net for the start of the Hurricane series. And no disrespect to Hank or Georgiev at all. It was just a matter of how Igor was playing toward the end there as they went into the halt of play, and how I was looking at the stats the other day, and Lundqvist, the last month and a half of play, only saw 2 starts, and one of which he was taken out after allowing 4 goals goals on 15 shots. So, Henrik is obviously, he's franchise goaltender, been there for years, all the respect to him, but it was getting to a point where with the three of them being on staff, it was impossible to give all three the same exact starts in net. And you just have to think about it logically with where Hank is at in his age and his contract and where Igor and Alex are right now in their careers. And I honestly, from me, I thought that Alex was going to be traded earlier in the beginning of the year because it just looked like, they'd never get rid of Hank and that they were prepping Igor to come up. But Georgiev gave them absolutely no reason not to keep him as the number 2 goalie, and he really earned that spot. So unfortunately, I think it'll shake out that Igor will probably be the guy that they give the nod to in that first game back.
Yeah, and then just staying on the goaltending real quick, you have the 3 guys there. What happens in the offseason? Does one of these guys go? Does Hank retire? Do they try to move his contract? Because in my opinion, and you can disagree, this is what we do on the show, I think Alex and Igor are the 2 guys you need to keep going forward just because they're younger and they have a proven track record right now. And no disrespect to Hank, he's been there, but it's those guys' time. And I think his time is over.
100%. Logistically speaking, Alex and Igor are the up and coming players for this team. And I think that if I haven't seen much about it since the CBA talks have been going on, but there was this idea of a compliance buyout being thrown around. So I think if that was ever given to the Rangers, I just don't think they would have a choice but to use it on Hank because of obviously his hefty contract and just where he is at with measuring up to the other 3 goaltenders.
And from what I understand from the traditional buyout like that, you'd only be paying 1/3 of the contract, whereas it would be Dolan would be paying 1/3 of the $8,500,000 for the last couple seasons until 2021. I want to think about how the timeline of the Rangers look. With 2020-21, you have Ryan Strome, who's a restricted free agent. You have Jesper Foss as a UFA. Brendan Lemieux, RFA. Then you have McKegg is a UFA, and Di Giuseppe's a RFA. So, and the Rangers also have $3,886,585,000 in cap space. Do you see the Rangers moving players before the draft in October?
It's definitely a possibility. I think that it's hard to say right now because of how the CBA is shaking out, and we're not 100% sure about the salary cap and such like that. From those players that you mentioned, though, I would say that Ryan Strome is probably a lock. Ryan Strome, absolutely came into his own this season, and he was a magnificent compliment to Artemi Panarin. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. I had watched Strome beforehand, obviously, and it was like putting Panarin next to him. It just put them both in a whole different league. They had such tremendous chemistry, but to your point, it's hard to say right now because of the negotiations shaking out, but we'll find out soon enough.
And another thing I want to follow up on is what's going on with Vitaly Kravtsov and Elias Andersson. What is going on with him being on loan?
I know Elias Andersson, didn't he decide not to come? Yeah, I'm pretty sure he said that.
Yeah, he's staying in Sweden, yeah.
Yeah, so he neglected to come. From all the different interviews I've read from him, he's a young kid. He had a very tough time adjusting to a foreign country, a new league, a whole different lifestyle and different way of playing. And that can be a lot. And having the expectations of being a number 7 draft pick I can't even imagine how exponential, how much pressure that must come with that. And I obviously don't know Swedish, but I from the translations that I've read that I would hope are correct, he, was staying up very late at night and waiting for his friends to come on and play video games with him. And he took sleeping pills because of it or something like that. And it just wasn't healthy for him. And it was just a very, very unfortunate situation for him. So I think he probably made the best decision for himself. It was too soon after everything that went on with him leaving the Hartford Wolfpack without notifying the team, and he was suspended because he did that. So I don't think it would have been in his best interest to come back, especially just given how uncertain everything is and how much more added stress is going to come with this whole moving to hub cities and such like that. So, but I do know Kravtsov skated this week, so he's in the mix. So we'll see.
And so you mentioned, younger players, and I want to switch over to the Islanders for a moment. Noah Dobson's been one of those guys who's been playing on and off with the Islanders because of that, the 9-game rule before you have to send a player back to juniors.
Mm-hmm.
Did Noah Dobson skate or anyone else along that Islanders defensive core? Because you have Andy Green, who's a 37-year-old veteran. Boychuk's 36. You do have Devon Taves and Scott Mayfield on the younger end, along with Ryan Pulak. So what is your expectations of Noah Dobson along with Mayfield?
I'm not 100% sure what Trotz will want to do, because it all is going to be shaken up now because Pelech is back. So I think that inserting, it's just a no-brainer that Pelech will be playing. So I think that it'll all come down to camp, and Trotz and the rest of the Islanders coaching staff will have to do their evaluations of the rest of the defensive players to see where it'll shake out. But my 100% assertion is I know Adam Pelech will be playing.
Yeah. Now with the Islanders, they had, other players come up from the AHL this year. And do you see any of the younger guys trying to come in as Black Aces that they'll bring in to their hub city when they're supposed to report at the end of July?
I'm not 100% sure it's all up in the air how many players they're going to be able to take. I believe Bob McKenzie reported on it, but it's all going to come down to how many players they're ultimately allowed to bring over to the hub cities. If I were to guess, if anybody that would be kind of surprising, but I personally wouldn't be surprised, I would love to see Kiefer Bellows get a chance. I was very, very impressed with him earlier in the season when he was originally called up. And, his dad was a former player too. And I actually had the opportunity to speak to his dad during his debut. And, you could just tell when a player grows up with a dad that played in the league, they're just cut from a different cloth. And I think Kiefer, it would just be a fantastic addition to the team for the 2014 tournament and in the future.
What about a kid like Oliver Wahlstrom? How long do you think before we see him permanently with the Islanders?
I haven't had the opportunity to watch Wahlstrom as much or talk to the coaching staff about him, but obviously he's in the top tier of prospects that are coming up right now. I think he'll definitely get a chance and get some looks at the 2021 training camp coming up. So it's all going to be a matter of what they see on the ice, especially after this weird break that everybody has. I feel like it just kind of gives everybody a clean sheet to come on the ice and show what they can do and show what they've been working on while they've had all this time away from the ice. I'm sure there are a ton of players that are bulking up, that are trying to put on muscle and hone in on their stick handling skills and things that they probably wouldn't be able to focus in on as much if they were playing as usual. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how the Islanders training camp shakes out next season.
And so in recent news, the Islanders' new arena is not too far off from being completed. What do you think about that being completed? While I have gone to games in Brooklyn and at Barclay where it's not exactly the hockey atmosphere that most fans think about, but what do you think about the new barn being almost finished for the upcoming season?
I think to answer your question, I'm going to quote Barry Trotz. It is not normal to have two home arenas. It will never be normal. It is just an astronomical concept that is kind of a shame that it was pushed upon the Islanders, because no other team has to deal with something like that, having to shuttle between two cities like that. So I think it's just going to be a relief to them to have a singular place to call their home, and it's on Long Island as well, and it's going to be brand new. So there are definitely going to be a lot of factors that play into it. But I just remember asking Barry Trotz about it and him just being like, it's about time, like it's absurd that they, and Brooklyn, again, the Barclays Center is just not equipped, not built to be a hockey rink. And that's fine. It was just something they had to do while the Coliseum was being renovated. I've covered a number of games at the Coliseum, and it's going to be the end of an era there. Obviously the atmosphere there is second to none. So I think they're just going to look to bring that atmosphere and the memories that they've had at the Coliseum to Belmont. And it's just going to be such a relief to them not to have to worry about shuttling between two different stadiums. And for me personally, having to go to morning skate on Long Island and then drive all the way to Brooklyn 2 hours later to cover the actual game. So from my own point of view.
That's a lot of gas mileage.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of gas mileage. I mean, you could clearly see last year during the playoffs that, the Islanders they lost something when they had to move from Nassau to Barclays Center after the first round. They just lost something. That atmosphere in Nassau Coliseum is something special, especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's just going to be such a relief to them not have to worry about going between two different stadiums or worrying about if they make the playoffs where they'll be playing. That's just crazy that there was a big question mark over that. It's just not normal. So it's just they're going to be normal like the rest of the league.
About time they're normal. I mean, look, I've been to Nassau Coliseum. I was at the first game at Barclays Center. I was never a fan of Barclays Center. But Coliseum got special memories for me. A lot of my friends are Islanders fans out in Long Island, so I've been there, skated there a couple times, so that's always fun. But, I just think they're one of the teams to me that you have to watch going into this 2014 playoff, because that defensive system with Barry Trotz, what he did with Washington, what he did last year. Like last year, no one expected the Islanders to be, anywhere. Same with like Columbus this year. No one expected them to be in the mix, but here we are. Columbus is there, Islanders there, and I just think the Islanders are a dangerous team, but that's just my opinion.
Definitely. I think Barry's a world-class coach. I think he has such a concrete vision of what he expects and such a concrete expectations of what he sees in each of his players. So, I mean, going from Washington, he won a Stanley Cup and walked out the door. What other coach, it's very Barry Trotz. So I like I said, I think he knows the level that his players can reach and the level that his team has reached in the 2019-20 season in particular. So his expectations are going to be nothing short of the same type of play they were showing in that 17-game point streak.
So if I had to give you a couple fun ideas, okay, one of them is during a playoff atmosphere, where would you rather be? The Islanders game or at the Rangers game? Who is the more fun atmosphere? I'm just going to hope that my mom doesn't listen to this, and I'm going to say the Islanders, just because that I really had the opportunity the last 2 months or so to cover the team as if I were a beat reporter, which I was so thankful that my editors let me do that. I was starting to cover practices and such, which the New York Post doesn't really do. We only focus more on the Rangers, but obviously the Islanders have just as many storylines and are just as interesting of a team. So I felt like I really was starting to get a taste of the beat writer life when I was covering the Islanders. So if I had to choose, I would have to say I want to go with all my Islander beat writer friends, and I'd like to be on that side. I believe it's the Daniel Bryan yes chant, and I think Jim can answer that because he loves his wrestling stuff. And that's usually for Wrestling Wednesdays with Lefty. So I'll let that go for another day. If you had to have a hockey
I have
team,
that T-shirt, by the way.
So, Mollie, if you had to start your own franchise,
Ooh.
You had to choose between Mika Zibanejad and Matthew Barzal.
Ooh.
Who are you going to take and why?
I mean, there would have to be, I would have to know the surrounding factors. You know, they're both very different players and in very different stages of their career. I guess if we're talking about a brand new spanking team, I you know, thinking about it, I think I'd have to go with Barzell just because he's younger and he has a larger upward trajectory, I guess you could say, whereas Mika is actually in the middle of the prime of his career. So I think in that sense, maybe I would go with Barzell. But if I had a surplus of young talent coming in, that I would go with Mika because, again, he's prime of his career and he's definitely a leader. I know a lot of Rangers fans are waiting for the C to be given to him. So it would have to depend. I'd have to see the surrounding arsenal, but they both have good cases for them.
And it seems that the Rangers and the Islanders both fall in love with the Ottawa Senators, like Derek Brassard, Zibanejad, JG Pajot.
Yep.
And it just seems like over the years that the Senators become like a farm system to those two teams. What do you think about JG Pajot's game when they traded for him before the deadline?
I mean, Pajot just made the depth to their front lines just so much deeper. It was monumental when he came in, and I really tip my cap to him. He was so dialed in to making himself a part of the Islanders and inserting himself in the middle of the team and proving to them that he was there for them, to play for them. And I think getting that contract extension also really solidified that the team had faith in him. The organization had a faith in him. And every time I talked to him about it, he said all he wanted to do was prove that he was worth that contract, to prove that he was worth the fact that they came out and got him, like they really pursued him. So I think he was very flattered by that and humbled by that as well. So I think that's just a class act type of response from a player. And he fit in so nicely there. And I remember his first game, he dropped the gloves because someone got absolutely, I think Trouba just wrecked someone, and he went after Trouba, and it was like JG's like 5'9" and Trouba's like 6'2", so and he had no problem, threw his gloves on the ice and went right after him. And afterward he said that he just wanted to prove that he's here to fight for this team and that he wants to be a part of it. So I think he has such the right attitude of how he's approaching his new career with the Islanders, and I think there are endless possibilities.
So speaking of, we got to switch over to the Rangers again and talk about Artemi Panarin and the season he's having. I got to imagine he's going to be one of the finalists for the Hart Trophy, don't you?
I do. Strictly speaking, because it's just about how a singular player affects the rest of his team. And there's just no question how much better the Rangers are when he's on the ice. He makes everybody around him better. He's he's a generational talent. And I mean, if you can look at a player that signed a contract like that and say it was inexpensive, then I think he did something right. I think it was worth every penny. He came in and he did above and beyond what I think anybody expected him to do. And I think he helped make the Rangers into what they were, which was so much more than anybody would have expected this season.
Do you think he wins it?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a betting woman. I'm not going to put my eggs in that basket, but he definitely should be considered, no doubt about it.
Well, it's funny just to stay on Panarin because a couple of guys, I got hooked up with a couple of the sites, gambling sites, and it's funny. His name is on there to lead the qualifying round at a nice number, and I was like, oh, well, I might throw a couple bucks on Mr. Panarin because of what he did in the regular season. I
mean, there's that. That would probably be your safest bet. If I were to guess.
Exactly. Outside of McDavid and Draisaitl, obviously, but it's going to be interesting considering that. I don't know what your take is on it, but I feel like the playing round isn't the Stanley Cup playoffs yet. But yet we see today and yesterday that the stats in the qualifying round are going to count towards the playoffs. Mm-hmm. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think it's valid. I think that given just how strange and unusual the whole format and tournament is by itself, that something like that isn't exactly strange and should be considered, considering it's kind of like an expanded playoffs, I guess you could say. So if you're putting the term playoff as an umbrella over the entire tournament, then it's only fair to include those stats in the qualifying rounds.
So I want to bring up a UMass theme because you
I'm so
are
excited.
an alum. I had to play this tune for you, and I got to talk some UMass alum. And so after this finishes up a little bit,
I hear it.
I want to get in. There's some awesome UMass Amherst alum on this website. Justin Braun of the Sharks, Matt Irwin. You have Brad Montour, Jonathan Quick,
Yep.
Connor Sheary, my East Longmeadow, Massachusetts hometown boy, and Frank Petrano.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Cale Makar.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to throw it out there.
Mario Ferraro. No disrespect.
And if you had to choose 3 of those alums,
Oof.
who would you want to be on your UMass alum NHL team?
Well, hands down, Cale Makar is number one. I mean, anybody that knows me personally knows how emotionally invested I was in his career going through UMass. I had the opportunity to cover him for his first 2 years at UMass. And then watching him go from, I was in Buffalo for the Frozen Four and watching him basically get on a plane that night and head out to Colorado, to start competing with them in the Stanley Cup, in the playoffs, was just, I mean, you couldn't have written it any better for him. So, and then scoring on his first goal, I will not say if I cried or not, but
we're all human. We can be emotional.
And honestly, it's such a relief to be a graduate from UMass now, because anybody can call me a homer as much as you want. I don't care. I embrace it with all my heart. He's a generational player, and hands down, Cale Makar I want on my team. I've always had such a special place in my heart for Jonathan Quick, having just been at UMass and walking down the halls every day of that hockey facility and seeing the pictures of him on the wall and just hearing stories about him as a player at UMass too. And, you know, you want to obviously have a good goaltender on your team. So it was also very cool for me to get to cover him this season, because I had always wanted to cover him while he was at UMass. So getting to cover him in the NHL was not as bad. Also quite an experience. And then I guess for my third, I would either have to go with maybe Connor Sheary or, like I said, Mario Ferraro. I mean, he's with the Sharks now, and it was his first season, and he, you know, he's not a type of player that lights up the stat sheet or is going to win any awards, but he's a glue guy, and he is a locker room guy, and he's just a great person all around, very authentic, very real, and just a great person to have on your team. Just a hard worker too. I know Greg Carvel said he's never seen a work ethic like he has seen in Mario Ferraro, and for someone like Greg Carvel, that's a very hefty compliment. So I would probably have to say those 4 are my top choices, but give Cale Makar the C, give him the A. I want him on the run-on team. Like, that's just how I feel about the situation.
Hey, you know what? Cale Makar, great player. You know, it's funny because playing with Colorado, one of my buddies, big Colorado guy, and he asked me about this Cale Makar kid coming in. I said, dude, you got a stud on your hands. Mm-hmm. You're gonna be set for life. And then when he comes in and just scores right away, I was like, yep,
first shot.
I know it. First shot in
Yes.
the net. I was like, yep, okay. And speaking of Mr. Makar, in the Calder Trophy, mm-hmm. He's got some competition this year with Quinn Hughes.
Jack Hughes' brother.
Both guys playing really well, but my guess is if you had a vote, it's going to Cale Makar.
I agree, and I've obviously been very invested in that race as well, as you can imagine. So I've looked at a lot of articles talking to executives and team coaches that are anonymous, asking for their opinion, Hughes or Makar, and as neck and neck as they are, they're both tremendous players. The one thing that I kept seeing was that each person in the league would say Cale just has that special something, that just something that you don't see in every player. So I think that alone is probably going to carry him to the Calder Trophy.
From what I was listening with Spittin' Chicklets, and Grinelli is the producer of that podcast, and he talks about how, the way he just jumps out there is just like, he's like a man-child, like an ape on the ice. Like, he makes things look so natural, like beast mode 24/7. He's on the ice. I want you to put out a recruitment, like a verbal recruitment on why someone should have their son or daughter apply to UMass for hockey or any sport on here. Because, this is, summer, and this is usually when, school kids usually have to get ready to go back to school. What would you tell them about UMass hockey and the traditions that you have dealt with in becoming a writer?
I mean, I had such a unique experience at UMass, especially where hockey was concerned. When I first started at UMass as a freshman, the hockey team won 5 games. So going from that year to my sophomore year, when Greg Carvel came in, he right off the bat, it was the largest turnaround in college hockey history, from wins, losses to wins. So as soon as you put someone like Greg Carvel at the helm, it was a no-brainer. And he came in and he gutted the team. When I tell you he gutted the team, there were literally 4 or 5 players that remained that were able to stick around. He got rid of everybody else. And it was a very party culture, very just not dialed into hockey, but Greg would absolutely not have that. So he came in, gutted the team, recruited Cale Makar, recruited Mario Ferraro, whole new group of young players, that they were one of the youngest teams in the entire league. And then to come in Greg's 3rd year and to make it to the Frozen Four and to beat teams like Ohio State and to get to face Minnesota Duluth, it was just a miracle on ice type story. It was nobody expected some team like UMass to make the Frozen Four, first time in program history. So, I mean, the culture that Greg has established there and that the assistant coaches have implemented there is unlike, it's unrecognizable compared to when I first came to UMass. So I mean, and I know that Cale Makar's younger brother actually committed to UMass as well. So that just goes to show that Cale's family evidently were very pleased with his development at UMass, enough to send their second child there. So that's a sort of validation you'd like to see. But I mean, I loved my time at UMass. The people there are great, from the academics to the athletic department. They make everything work, really. I mean, I always say that UMass should cut me a check for how many people I sent to their admissions office. I am UMass's biggest fan. So I think that the UMass hockey program, they're now on the map, and that's really all that you can ask for.
And it sounds like the growth of college hockey in a place where hockey really wasn't looked at as serious. It seems like, guys like Tommy Fitzgerald are beginning to scout those places that are becoming more sought after, especially with programs like Providence University. What do you think of how the growth of college hockey has really helped the future of the NHL draft, especially with the Islanders and Rangers looking at players from there, as well as the Devils?
I think the NHL, one of my favorite things about the NHL is just how many different paths you can take to get to the NHL. You do juniors, USHL, any type. There are so many different leagues, and college hockey is definitely something that I think wasn't a normal route a while ago. And then steadily it started to be gaining more traction and becoming more of a normal route for college hockey, for hockey players to take in general. I think it also just pairs with the fact that they're able to get an education, and that is a great thing, that if it works for a player, that they can pursue that as well on top of furthering their hockey career. And I know, Zach Jones is a Rangers prospect. He's with UMass, and I know Greg Carvel told me that after he competed in the World Juniors, the Rangers sent along a personal note to Greg thanking him for what he's done with Zach Jones already in his first year. So I think that there are a lot of very capable coaches in college hockey, coaches that have been there for years too. So I think it's a really great developmental stage that if a player can handle it, that they should do that.
And Adam Fox played with Riley Walsh at Harvard University. What was it about Fox and Riley Walsh that you saw when they would play against UMass for Harvard?
I really only remember the one game that I watched my senior year. It was hard. I think it was toward the end of the season. It was a big game because it was Fox versus Makar. I believe UMass won, I think 3-0. I think it was a very lopsided game. And so I don't think it was a very accurate representation of how someone like Fox would measure up to Makar. But I mean, after watching Fox this year, he's very poised with the puck, very wise beyond his years, just acts like a veteran on the ice when he's only in his first season, which I think is a trait that's very hard to come by. And like I said, they were gassing him up on the podcast the other day. He doesn't even know he's as good as he is. And I know that on Twitter, he's been doing a lot of ALS of fundraising and stuff, and he's just a great addition to the community. Obviously, when you're Harvard educated, it's kind of hard not to miss the mark in New York. So I think he's a great addition.
Yeah, I mean, college hockey is just picking up everywhere. Like I had a buddy of mine go to UMass, work with the hockey team closely. So he got me a shirt. So I got, closet UMass guy. And speaking of, it's funny, I had a funny story real quick. It just came into my head when you were mentioning Jonathan Quick. When I was in Vermont for an MS tournament that I play in every year, I was hanging out with, my teammates. We're at the pool at one of the hotels, and I peek out of the corner of my eye, and I said to the guy next to me, I said, "Is that Jonathan Quick?" And he's like, He's like, Jonathan Quick. He's like, what's he doing in Burlington, Vermont? So we end up going over there. We end up going over there chatting. He's like, yeah, here I'm having my brother's bachelor party. I'm like, in Burlington, Vermont? I'm like, yeah, I just don't want to be recognized. It's like, oh, that stinks. We got a hockey tournament around. There's so many guys that are going to recognize you now.
Oh, he was probably like, damn.
No, he was actually cool about it because we just chatted. We weren't even talking hockey. We were just chatting about everything, but he was such a nice guy. And then, obviously we had to go, to bed and play our game the next day, but he was actually just a nice guy, just courteous enough to just take the time and speak to us. So, I mean, you just see it through and through, all these guys just are down to earth, humble guys that know where they come from. And you just got to respect that about hockey players.
For sure.
And it just seems like the culture is just beginning to really improve. Penn State hockey's really grown. They have New Jersey Devil, Arne Talvitia, the Finn, at Penn State, and Arizona State has grown their program, and Cole Brady's their goaltender going in, and Eddie Lack was their goalie coach for a little bit before becoming a real estate agent. What do you think about the future of the Islanders going forward with the youth movement?
I mean, to keep on the college hockey route, I think, if you have prospects that are in the college hockey realm, it's so much easier of a transition, I would say, considering how their schedules are mapped out. It's a little different, but it's the same type of, game after game. They do 3-game series, 2-game series. It's 3 games a week. So it's a very competitive, very high scale type of environment. And it's obviously much shorter than the NHL season if you don't go far in the playoffs, but it's just a very competitive ground that is, I would imagine is a much easier transition into the NHL, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Definitely makes sense for sure. It definitely does make sense. Real quick, with what's going on in the world that we live in, with the COVID and everything, and we see that the Ivy League is canceling all fall sports and having Harvard has online classes. Do you think we'll see a college hockey season this year?
Unfortunately, I'm a very big Debbie Downer when it comes to this whole thing. If I'm being honest with you, I don't even see the NHL getting to the hub cities. I think it would be amazing if they do, and if they're able to contain virus cases in the league and such. But with what we've seen the last couple of weeks, just in general, as they've been finalizing all these things for the hub cities, is there's just more positive tests coming every day, and one team shutting down their facility, and then another team shutting it down the next, and this team couldn't get on the ice because they're waiting for their results. It's just it's very disrupted right now, and I would just be very surprised if it actually all came to fruition. Unfortunately, I hate to be a Debbie Downer because I really don't want to be, but I just looking at it logistically, it's just a very, very sticky situation. And I think with colleges in particular, it's going to be so difficult because they're allowing each individual state which would mean each individual campus and school is allowed to dictate how they're running their classes, how they're running, everything. And, how do you put together a season if half, your conference is not competing or not having classes in session in person, and the players aren't even going to be on campus. So it's just all very up in the air right now. And I'm very anxious to see how they are able to map all these things out. But it's very hard to see it all coming to fruition, unfortunately.
So I'm looking at in case you missed it, top 10 Rangers prospects. We talked about Shesterkin. We talked about Kravtsov. You mentioned Zach Jones. Nils Lundqvist, Keandre Miller, and Julien Gauthier.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about those guys' potential futures going forward with the Rangers, or do they need a little bit longer to season before jumping on the blue line and the forward groups?
I definitely think of all those players that you mentioned, I would say look out for Keandre Miller the most. I think if I had to guess, he would be one of the first. He'll definitely have a lot of eyes on him this upcoming training camp for sure, just because of, all I've read about him is his build. He is a massive man. He is like a 6'3", probably 6'5" with skates, then that means. And he's just a very toned, strong defenseman. So I'm very excited to see his upward mobility. As for players like Zach Jones, I think he'll do very well with another year underneath his belt, maybe even two. He's a little undersized, and I think he still has a ways to go with his skill set. But they have a very decent prospect pool right now, and I think they're just starting to skim the surface with Shesterkin coming up and Kravtsov now coming into the conversation. So I'm very optimistic about what they have. Whether or not they'll make more moves to, increasingly increase the depth of this pool is yet to be seen. I don't think it could hurt, but they definitely do have a very nicely sized pool right now to choose from and to evaluate the next upcoming training camp, not this one.
Well, what do you think of Matthew Robertson, Morgan Barron, and Carl Henriksson and Lauri Pajuniemi?
I will say for Morgan Barron, I spoke to him right around when everything paused, because I was very curious to see if he would want to continue at Cornell for his senior season after having his junior season cut short. And I don't know if you know, but Cornell was doing very well heading into the Frozen Four and such, and they were very optimistic of their chances. And he was heartbroken that was ripped underneath him. And how could you blame him? He explicitly said to me that he wanted to come to Cornell to win a national championship in college hockey, and I think that's going to be a huge thing thing in the back of his mind while he's considering what his next move is. And again, I think this Ivy League situation and what they're going to do with college hockey will play a big part in that. It won't even be up to him if he wants to play in college hockey again. You know, he might not have a choice but to go pro. But I think Morgan also has a very upward trajectory, and he had a very good head on his shoulders when I spoke to him about his current situation, which is all you can ask from a college kid, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to see where he goes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see for sure, because it'll be interesting to actually watch like the whole NCAA as a whole, because the eligibility, do they let these guys play out years, or are players just gonna leave or sit out, or it's just we're such at a weird time in society, and with the virus and everything. So I hope he gets a shot to win a national title. But if not, going pro isn't a bad thing either.
No, definitely not.
And what are your expectations of the college hockey players from this year's draft? Like, for instance, Dylan Holloway's with Wisconsin. What do you think about guys like him trying to make a name for those big schools that are usually like big brand names?
I think it's all great in the name of college hockey. I think that the more like top draft picks that decide to stay at school or decide to or commit to a college before they're even drafted, that in particular, when you commit before you're even drafted, that's plastered all over the screen, so I think it's a very good gig for college hockey in general, and the NCAA just growing the name of college hockey and what it has to offer, and how many players have gone that route and been successful in their NHL careers and were able to get their degrees and have a college experience too, which I think was very interesting. I think it's important for players and young men to have that opportunity to be a kid and to have fun for a little bit before they dedicate the rest of their lives to a sport.
Yeah, and also there's a kid in Jake Sanderson who his father was in the NHL, big presence back in his days. Jake Sanderson, by a few scouts, was mentioned to go in the top 3, but he could go in the top 10. What do you think about a kid like him going to University of North Dakota as a left-handed defenseman, learning to become a more two-way mobile defenseman?
If I'm being honest, I don't know that much about the other prospects in the NHL, but I think it's all it's all good. It's all good for these players, and getting to go to schools and make a name for themselves. I think it also is a confidence thing. It's, I can't imagine what it did for Cale to literally put UMass on the map, to literally be responsible for leading a team to a place that it's never gone before. So just being, an NHL draft pick in general, there's a lot of notoriety that comes with that nowadays. So going to a smaller school like North Dakota is just, it's just good for college hockey.
So, little interesting note while we were giving answers here, Bob McKenzie tweeted out that with all these players like Sorokin, as we spoke with before, while they may not be eligible to play in the 1920 return to play Phase 4, they may, if everything is ratified, get to participate in training camp. So that'll be interesting to see if that happens, especially for a guy like Sorokin. Do the Islanders say, hey, come on over, even though you're not going to play, we're going to give you some experience taking shots?
Yeah, I mean, if that was the case and Sorokin was able to get his feet wet and come over and just to meet the guys and meet the coaching staff and just, show a little bit of what you can do, I think any player would be willing to take that sort of opportunity. So, I mean, if that's the case, then I would bet that Sorokin would come. So we'll see.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and also we can't forget the Vancouver Canucks have Minnesota Golden Gophers Brock Besser, and there is Quentin Hughes, another former college hockey player, going into this play-in round. And it just seems, with all the talk we talk about these former college hockey players. It seems to be a great recruiting tool. What do you think about those other teams as they play in their respective playing rounds? Do you think for like the Canucks, they can beat the Minnesota Wild?
I think that both those teams measure up very well, and I think that it'll be a really good experience for like the players that are coming into the league for the first time and experience. This is a whole new experience for anybody. So I mean, I think it'll definitely take a second for everybody to kind of just take a breath and just figure out like it's a whole new norm, a whole new schedule with the testing and such. I mean, it's just so hard for me to see it actually coming to fruition. It really is. If I'm being honest with you, it really is hard for even me to imagine it.
Usually NHL.com does like a playoff bracket, and if there was a bracket, who would you be choosing as your winners?
Oh, sorry, say that again. For like the qualifying round, or
yeah, for the play-in round plus the all the way to the Stanley Cup, like a playoff bracket that they do for Frozen Four.
Yeah.
Who would be in like your bracket? Like for instance, the Rangers playing against Carolina, et cetera. Move a step forward.
You're gonna ask me to say the entire bracket. Who's gonna advance?
I would say give us your conference finalists.
Okay.
I would say Final Four.
Oh gosh, putting me on the spot like this, I'm gonna invoke the fifth. I'm gonna plead the fifth. I think I've given enough about how I think the Islanders and Rangers will match up. I don't think it would be respectful to say again. Like it's so hard to say who is going to be able to. Okay, one thing I will say that Scott Mayfield said on an Islanders conference call a while ago is that he felt like this tournament was going to be a quote unquote test of minds, which I believe, because it'll be a test of who can block out all the distractions, because there are so many different intangible things that players are going to be working through that I just don't even think it's fair to sit here and make an assumption, because we're not even sure what the conditions are going to be like when they get there. Who knows what different teams are going to be dealing with at the time and what kind of distractions are going to come into play. So I'm going to go with Scott Mayfield's with his quote and say it'll be a test of minds to see who emerges into the conference final. There you go. Final answer.
All right, you know what? That's fair, because people ask me to give predictions on stuff, and I said, you know what? I predicted the 2015 Stanley Cup playoffs right. I said I'm never doing another prediction again. So, but it's funny because I always hear like guys are talking about how this, it takes 16 wins to win a Stanley Cup. It's the most difficult trophy, to win. Well, this year, if it does happen, it will definitely be the most difficult trophy and championship to win.
I agree wholeheartedly.
19 games through a qualifying round and plus qualifying. Well, and say this is successful, because we've had a couple other guests come on and talk about this. Say it is successful. Do you see them expanding the playoffs to maybe adding a couple of more teams going forward?
Doing it in the future?
Yeah, doing it in the future.
Probably not. Honestly, after this whole shebang, I can't even imagine it. On top of it all falling on the same time that they're ratifying the CBA, I just think they've been going through so much the last 3 months that once it's all done, they're actually going to be like, nobody touch anything. Nobody move. We're going back to the way that it was. We're just going to pick up like as if, it's just a delayed 2020-21 season, So I really can't imagine.
It could have easily been a cash grab.
Yeah, I can't. I really don't see them after, especially because they're going to agree. I feel like that's something that they would have to figure out now, right, in this CBA agreement. So I feel like I just don't see that happening. I think they're going to want to go back to normal if possible.
Yeah, I mean, they've always hinted at it. Like Pierre LeBrun's always said, oh, yeah, it's going to come. They're going to do it. I just think 16 teams, it makes sense. You got enough teams in it already.
Yeah, it's more competitive.
This is an outlier. And I don't care what anybody says. The reason they did it is for the Rangers, Canadians, and Blackhawks. Anybody can tell me any differently. I don't believe them. Because if it was the Devils, Sabres, and name another team, it's 16 teams or it's 20 teams. That's it.
I'm so sorry you feel that way, because I actually really thought that this format was really smart. I really did like how they gave the top 4 teams, each conference, the buy-in, then the 5-game play-in series. I think it was very well thought out. I will give them that.
I will give them credit for doing it, but I kind of feel bad for I can kind of feel bad for the Bruins because they were the best team in the Eastern Conference pretty much the whole year, and they're got to be thrown into this round robin seeding thing. Yeah. But anyway, how to have the CBA and the return to play format and have a new CBA, how nice is it to have labor peace in the National Hockey League finally?
Yes, I definitely think that was something that was looming. And even the other day when Artemi Panarin released that statement about how he wasn't sure if he thinks that the players should report to training camp before the CBA is ratified and finalized, I don't blame him. I really don't. We saw it with Major League Baseball. It's a very cunning, very biting just negotiation process, and it's not always done in good faith, which that's once it gets to that kind of point, you need to tread lightly. you don't want to piss off your product is kind of how I look at it.
One of the things I read about Artemi Panarin's statement was about how he was upset about the escrow, and Corey Schneider on the Devil side spoke on his part, said you're not going to be able to abolish it, but you have to moderate it to an extent. And they seem to have found a formula where they could cut it down after 20% and get it down to 18, eventually 10%, if I remember the correct percentages. And then it gets owed a little bit later towards the last few years of the CBA, if I recall correctly.
Yes, I believe it's going to roll over too, is something like that. So I think I think it was an important thing that they needed to rectify and that they needed to acknowledge, because obviously when you see some player like Artemi Panarin making that kind of statement, it holds weight. So I think that someone like him speaking out, a lot of players started to pay attention and were, I'm sure during those NHLPA calls and such. I know Ryan Strome talked about a 2-hour call he was on the other day, a couple of weeks ago. I can't even imagine what those calls must be like. So I think that they all were on the same page, which is a good thing, because in Major League Baseball, it just felt like everybody was all over the place. I was just worried that it could get to a point like Major League Baseball did, but I'm happy that it seems to be going on a normal schedule.
Yeah, me too. I mean, considering that they had, considering before the COVID break and the suspension of play, they were working together, which is really good considering who is the head of the Players Association and his track record with Major League Baseball. And I'm on the side of, I don't even with these summer camps going on for baseball, I just don't see it happening just because with everything going on between the players and the owners there, I just don't think it's going to happen. But they can prove me wrong on that one. But I have this feeling, just the way everything's been done with hockey and the way they've had so much harmony, that I think they're the one sport that can pull this off and get it there. But that's just me.
No, I agree. I definitely think so. I also think each athlete is cut from a different cloth, and also the money is so much different in baseball than it is in hockey or the NFL than it is in hockey, and it's just a whole different playing field. So I think the NHL and the NHLPA are a little bit more down to earth. If I had to, right, the numbers that they're dealing with are just not as astronomical as the other leagues. So I think that it's just a much more calmer negotiation, and the MLB and the players going back and forth about the amount of games that they're playing and such. It's just all little finicky, details that they're going back and forth with each other about, and it got to a point where it was bad faith. Like, I think that was the one phrase that I kept seeing in all of our baseball columns and articles, is that it just got to a point where everything was being done in bad faith. And that would have been worst case scenario if it carried over to the NHL like that.
And so we all think about, players getting paid big time, and Matthew Barzal is a restricted free agent. What do you think he will fetch for term and money, given the fact of where we are in the world?
Well, given where we are in the world and with how the new CBA will affect contracts and stuff, I am not confident enough to put a number on anything, but I would be surprised if they gave Barzal anything less than 3 years, 4 years. Like, he's so young. He's how do I say this? He's definitely made his worth known. When he's on. And I think that he's very valued in the locker room as well. I remember in the beginning of quarantine when I was calling each of the individual players and asking them fun quarantine jokes. I asked them, who would the person be that they don't want to quarantine with the most? And Barzal was almost unanimously said the entire by each player, which I thought was hysterical, that, he's just that jokester. And, he's kind of one of the young guys on the team. Even when he has players like Noah Dobson below him, he's still, considered one of the youngins, and so full of life and just passion for the game and such. So I think that Barry Trotz has done a really good job of honing him down, I guess I should say. He's a very big personality, and I know Trotz isn't that big of a fan of those kinds of players. So I think Trotz is a very good complement of a coach to Barzal, and I think Trotz knows the kind of value that Barzal brings to the ice. So I would definitely anticipate a solid contract extension with him.
And what do you think of the coaching styles difference between Coach Quinn on the Rangers and Barry Trotz? And if you believe, one of them has a better philosophy and strategy, who would you pick that would run that special NHL team you would run?
I think that they're both cut from different cloth. I think if you want to pick a Stanley Cup ready head coach, it's by far Barry Trotz, for obvious reasons. Quinn just made the leap from college hockey, and he's still used to college hockey circumstances and communicating with college hockey players. One of the biggest question marks for him was how he was going to handle players like Henrik Lundqvist and Mark Stahl, and the players that have really been around for a long time, and how he would connect with them. But I think Quinn does have a very good grasp on his team, and he emphasizes a lot about communication and keeping a pulse on the team. But Barry just knows what he wants. Barry has a very strict way that he runs the team, and you can just tell by the way that they respond to him on the ice and his presence on the ice, how everybody perks up when he speaks. But Quinn is starting to find his voice. I think I know he was starting to really become vocal on the ice and practice and stuff toward the end there, and starting to find his way and find his style of coaching as well. But I mean, just because of their circumstances, Barry Trotz is the Stanley Cup ready coach.
For sure. I mean, everybody loved Trotz. I mean, I guess it really wasn't a shock to anybody when he came to the Islanders, because of his track record and then what he did. Like you said before, you win a Stanley Cup and then boom, you walk off and you go to another team.
It's like a mic drop.
Yeah, exactly, like a mic drop, and as Dan Patrick likes to say, they like to call it walk off. But it's same thing. But it's interesting because both teams have different matchups. I know, you don't want to put statistics into anything. But you look at the one hand, the Rangers play the Hurricanes, as I mentioned before, 3-0 in a regular season, but you kind of have to throw stats out the window when you comes to this playing round, right?
100%. I would not. I mean, the only thing that people can argue, I guess, is that Henrik Lundqvist was in goal for those 3 games. So he's familiar with the team, familiar with those games. So I think that's the only thing that anybody could really argue. But I like I was saying before, it's just nobody has experienced the type of circumstances that they're going to be under traveling to these hub cities and such. So it really is just all going to be about who can block out all the noise, who can just get back to doing what they were doing, get back to playing hockey and not, shaking off the rust and just getting through those blunders that they are going to make in the beginning just because of the adrenaline from coming back. It's all going to be a test of those little things that just they come no matter what with being off the ice and not competing for so long.
Definitely. I 100% agree with that. Couldn't agree more. It's just going to be if we get hockey, it's going to be great. Hopefully we do, because I think fans are chomping at the bit for something to watch on television, and it's going to be a battle of who wants it more and who can survive and block out the noise, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it just seems like they mentioned there's going to be like 3 games a day, like in 3 different parts of like, I think, 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 p.m. For Eastern Standard Time. I was looking at, if that's correct.
Yeah, I believe so. I think it was. Let's see if I can find it.
I think it starts at like 12 Eastern.
12, 4, and 8. I think I want to say it was. And
yeah, 12, 4, and 8.
That.
Yeah, 12, 4, and 8. And then because of the time difference between Toronto and Edmonton, it's going to be like staggered. I think it is. It's going to be like an all-day marathon, which is phenomenal if it actually happens.
I mean, 15 hours of hockey. I mean, that would be. I mean, this is gonna be like tournaments all over again. You're just watching like hockey nonstop, which is fine. I mean, none of us are going anywhere for work anyway, so I mean, we can just watch it on TV. So
I'll be back after 5:30, so I'll be watching the rest of those ones, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing for me is going to be like what happens when like these games, if one of these like early games goes long, like because those are the playing round games. And the middle games, I believe, are like the seeding games.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things that you think of when you think of this possible 2014 tournament. The one thing that the analogy I keep using is like, let's say hypothetically the Penguins get to the Stanley Cup Finals, and the day before the Stanley Cup Finals start, Sidney Crosby tests positive for the coronavirus. Are you really going to tell the Penguins that they have to take the ice for the Stanley Cup Finals without Sidney Crosby? Like how it's not like, if I were the Penguins, I would say no. I would actually be like, no, we'll wait the 2 weeks until Sidney can come back and then we'll play, because it's just unfair. How can you actually say that the Penguins competed in the Stanley Cup Finals if Sidney Crosby wasn't there? Yeah,
I mean, it's a good analogy because, I mean, as we saw in basketball last year, with the Raptors winning, all you heard was, oh, well, the Warriors, they weren't up to snuff while their guys were hurt.
Exactly.
Well,
and that's in a regular
NBA tournament. And that's a regular, exactly. And I 100% agree with that. I mean, it was interesting to listen to like Marcellus Wiley, like to talk about how like, you would treat it like a regular injury in a regular season. Guys are out. Yeah, that's a regular season. Guys are cut differently in the playoffs. They want to play regardless of injury or regardless of anything. So to tell a player, yeah, you got to sit out because you have COVID-19, it'd be like, no.
Yeah, and what if they're asymptomatic? Like,
yeah,
I mean, what player wouldn't throw a tantrum? Like, what player would not just be absolutely distraught that this was happening to them? Like, that's another mental thing that, like, I feel so bad for the situation. I really do. And I feel like there are a lot of people in this country and just a lot of hockey fans that are completely disregarding the fact that these are people with men with families and people that they care about, and that they're real people that have feelings, and subjecting them to this kind of stress and this kind of uncertainty is just, it's very unfair in my book. So, I mean, I'm very curious to see how things shake out, especially because I remember in the beginning, Gary Bettman talked about how much emphasis he was going to put on everything being fair. This was before he even came out with the qualifying round, format and such like that, is that he knew how important it was to each team to be treated fairly and to not be put at a disadvantage because of everything that happened. So, and I think he delivered on that part with the way that the tournament is structured. It's very fair. But I just think it'll get to a certain point where there are just going to be things that aren't fair that you can't even avoid.
Yeah, agreed.
It just seems like, everything's going to start from square one. And it just seems like the way that the playoffs will eventually round out to is each team's going to, unfreeze and defrost and start to become more fluid through each round, which we hope is the result in the way they get back to playing, instead of just the best of 5, but a best of 7. It's going to be pretty interesting to see how everything shakes out.
Yeah, 100%.
So as we wrap here, I want to thank Mollie for coming on and talking some hockey with us today. I know she was really excited, but she wasn't sure if she could do it with all the breaking news that happened over the last couple of days.
Yes, and Lindy's presser definitely threw me for a loop today.
Yes, but we appreciate you making the time in your busy schedule to come on Heads Up Hockey podcast, to talk some pucks, some Devils, even though we know you don't cover them as much, but you got to cover the press conference today, talk some Rangers, Islanders, and the rest of the league, especially Cale Makar, because he's a UMass boy.
Especially Cale Makar and UMass.
Yeah, exactly.
I had to blur in the UMass fight song.
Yeah, I was about to say, and I got to relive my university fight song. So thank you for giving me that.
You're welcome.
You are welcome. Anytime. Thank you again for coming on, and we hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.